We will continue to have folks log in and join us, but in respect out of everybody's time, we will go ahead and get started this afternoon. I'm Julie Sanderson. I'm the event director for the Toledo Regional Chamber of Commerce, and today my job is to introduce to you Brian Dickin, who is our Vice President of Advocacy and Public Policy, and he's going to go ahead and get us started today.
Thanks, Julie. And thank you for everyone who has joined us this afternoon. We've got a pretty good crowd. So as Julie said, this is our Creating a Culture of Business Ethics webinar, and very pleased to have Shumaker help us with the information that's going to be presented today. So unfortunately, we've all seen over the past few weeks what happens when elected officials don't always act maybe the way they should. And so we just want to help make sure that the business community has the information that they need to make sure that their organization is operating the way that they should be, and help to recognize any signs of trouble brewing and some of their interactions with officials. And then just as importantly, how to help mitigate those risks internally. So very pleased to have Rebecca Shope, one of the partners at Shumaker, among her practice areas, working with both public and private entities, looking at internal investigations and risk management. So certainly some great experience there. And the other person that we have with us this afternoon, Doug Haynam, when he's not doing a lot of environmental law, certainly brings a wealth of business practice and experience, and some expertise when it comes to public election law. And when he's not in the courtroom and helping clients, he serves as a Toledo City Council member. So certainly able to bring some of that experience and that perspective as we go through. So we're going to probably ask if anybody has any questions, if you can just put those in the chat box. And I know that they're going to cover a lot of information, so we'll hold questions to the end. Just to make sure we can get through everything, but please send those. And again, thank you for joining us, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Rebecca to get us started.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this Thursday afternoon. Doug and I are both excited to be presenting to you on this topic. We're thrilled to see the attendance and the attendees. So feel free, as either of us are talking, to put your questions in the message box, and we'll do our best to answer those. As Brian mentioned, I specialize in employment law, so I have a unique opportunity to go into a lot of workplaces and really get to see corporate culture. And I will tell you, sometimes it amazes me because it's fantastic. It's a company that I sit there and go in and say, well, I would want to be here. Other times you see where corporate culture can get sideways. And so my portion of the presentation today is really going to address generally, how do we as managers, as business owners, maintain a good corporate culture? And I'm going to provide you some just general tips relative to that. And then I'm going to hand it over to Doug, and Doug's going to talk with you. He's going to be more specific as to government and some of the public sector works, and how we can still maintain a solid and ethical political races and campaigns. So
Rebecca, let me just say it's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you everyone taking the time to join us today. Rebecca is a great partner, and I've enjoyed practicing law with her, and I've been at Shumaker for a long time, too long to recount right now, or we'll just skip that. But I've also bring to the presentation a unique, well, it's not unique, but a different angle because of 17 years of serving on Sylvania City Council, and having been involved historically with political campaigns and politics for well over 25 years. And I serve currently as general counsel to the Lucas County Republican Party, which, and the only reason I can do that is because I've got 25 years of seeing it done wrong. So we are and in today's, particularly in today's environment, business ethics and government ethics are paramount. I know they're in the thoughts of a lot of you. So without any further delay, we'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Okay, thanks, Doug. So I'm going to share my screen. Hold on just a minute so we can get rolling. Okay. Just one moment. Can you see that?
Yeah, click right there.
I am. Sorry, guys. Of course, the technical difficulties. Beginning.
You might be able to just close that box.
No. Oh, there we go. Okay. Thank you, guys. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about ethical business practices for your business. And, oh gosh, why is this not? Where's technology?
Bottom right next to Zoom, it says.
Sorry, everyone. Let me try one more time. Of course, when you try this, it works. There. From the beginning. There we go. Okay. So creating a culture of business ethics, sorry again about that delay. Everything you read talks about ethics starting from the top. And if owners and if executives and if upper level managers are not perceived as trustworthy, employees will follow suit. And in my workplace investigations, I see that all the time. If you have a manager who thinks it's okay to add a few hours on his time card, and then he trains the person underneath that to say, well, that's okay too, you see where it permeates into the corporate structure and thinking that, you know, well, I saw my manager do this, I saw the owner do this, so that's going to be perceived as okay. If employees see that happening, they will see that as appropriate behavior. So anything that you do from a business standpoint, any policies you put in place should include owners, executives, managers. Otherwise, it will be just a piece of paper and viewed as useless. Just some interesting specifics to really highlight that point. There was a survey conducted by the Ethics and Compliance Initiative. And in that survey, employees said that members of management were responsible for 6 out of every 10 instances of misconduct. And those employees pointed the finger at senior managers in 24% of observed rule breaking. Middle managers were also identified as the culprit of at least 19% of the time, and first line supervisors were identified as bad actors 17% of the time. Another interesting survey that was conducted said 75% of employees identified either their senior or middle management as the primary source of pressure that they felt to compromise their standards in their organization, and 70% of those employees identified pressure to meet unrealistic business objectives as most likely to cause them to compromise their ethical standards. And so these statistics show, and you can see where the breakdown in culture can begin. If you have managers doing that, I mean, that's a huge statistic. 6 out of every 10 instances of misconduct they pointed to as coming from their managers. So important, we have to start the conversation at the top. So what's the significance? I mean, why do we care besides just being good people? Well, there are actually financial correlations with business culture and business ethics. Statistics will show that You have companies where employees perceive the company and where clients perceive the company as being ethical. That will translate into dollars because those clients and those customers are going to say, this is a business I want to work with, and the employees themselves are going to have a greater deal of satisfaction. So how do we, what's the significance? How do we get there? Well, we want to start by developing an ethics policy or some type of mission statement that really helps set the foundation and building blocks for good culture and reputation. Of course, your reputation is going to be one of the best business assets. And once it is lost, it is very, very difficult to regain trust. And you can see that in today's events, and I'm sure Doug will touch on that as well. I mean, once you lose that public trust, once you lose employee trust, once you lose customer, client trust, that is impactful and it's very difficult to get that back. The great thing about implementing an ethics policy too is that it's a way to help employees and managers and owners of a company by giving everyone parameters about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in the workplace without necessarily needing to constantly answer questions or necessarily supervise them on a constant basis. The Society of Human Resources Management recently put out a statement that indicated that companies that work to build ethical workplaces and cultures are more financially successful and have more motivated, productive employees. So where do we go from here? The starting point. I think each and every one of the companies need to be asking themselves, do we have something currently in place? Do we have a, do we have a ethics policy in place? Do we have a code of conduct in place? Any company that's operating needs to have an ethical policy in writing. Oftentimes, it's going to be part of your employee handbook. Sometimes companies will choose to set some type of mission statement and outline their ethics in a mission statement. Importantly, every employee at the company should receive something and have a signed acknowledgement regarding your ethics policies. And the policies oftentimes, especially when lawyers get involved, they can be complicated. They can be, difficult to read. It contain a lot of legalese. We don't want to do that here. We want our employees and our managers to understand these policies and be able to adhere to those. Also, as situations arise within your workplaces, it's really important that you continue to review those existing policies to make sure that it's really covering all questionable situations that might occur with respect to your particular business. So I'm going to briefly discuss just some common topics that you should be addressing in each of your code of conduct or ethics policies. So some of the common topics that should be addressed, some of them seem commonplace and common sense, but honesty, respect, integrity, trustworthiness, all of that should be addressed. Potential conflicts of interest and conduct with customers and vendors, compliance with the law, bribery, theft, anti-discrimination. And we're going to talk about I'm going to talk about each of these briefly today. So here are some example statements that employers may decide to choose to add in their mission statements or in their ethics policies. Again, this is not all comprehensive. This is not intended for you to necessarily copy and paste. I would suggest that you really tailor this to your particular company, but this can certainly give you a starting point. So honesty, what do we as a company feel like we need to do? Our employees won't say things that are false. We want to respect each other. So having something in that policy about respecting and valuing the ability of others and integrity, that we're going to live up to the company's ethical principles and policies. And I put down here on the slide violations. It's important what a company does in the event of violations. So in the event of violations, I mean, if you turn a blind eye, these policies are going to be meaningless. I have a certain client that is a banking institution, and I will tell you, they discover any dishonesty. It doesn't matter if it's lying about something small. They've taken the position that person's out, because we as a banking institution cannot tolerate dishonesty. And what I've observed, at least, is that really has created a culture where people understand honesty is upheld and is something that's fundamental to the core of that banking institution. Another thing to be watchful of when you're talking about creating an ethical company is just how we deal with vendors. Gifts and gratuities. And so one thing we always like to address in our ethics policy is gifts. And here I've included some sample language to ensure the highest level of objectivity in dealing with vendors and suppliers, contractors, and agencies, and to avoid the appearance of impropriety. Employees are not permitted to accept personal benefits of any kind, including gifts, entertainment, etc. Oftentimes, though, companies will have a carve out because we understand that sometimes, of course, there are going to be Christmas gifts that are given by vendors. And so you can have a carve out that just says infrequent nominal gifts valuing not more than $100, $50 can be accepted on occasion, but still must be reported. And so this is a sample of something that a company may want to put in place, particularly if vendor dealings might be an issue or something that could come up as potentially problematic. Along those same lines, in order to create an ethical business model, you want to make sure you're dealing with how are we spending our company funds. And so employees are going to need some type of guideline for that, and to make sure that they're using those company funds appropriately and they're not authorizing or condoning payments of any type of bribe or kickback or undisclosed commission. And to make sure you put that in writing so people understand the parameters here. And also, how are we allowed to use the company credit cards or other corporate expenditures as well? This may seem just like very basic, but putting something in there, either in your handbook or in your policy that states that we're required to comply with laws and regulations and rules. Number one, it's a good overall carve out. And so that if you have an employee who's violating some type of law or policy, you can point to this section in your handbook or in your policy. But number two, it just reiterates this is something that's not tolerated. Along those same lines, the companies must make very clear that retaliation is not permitted. So if I see something in the workplace that I report, and I think it's unethical, that my coworker is not going to be allowed to retaliate against me. My supervisor is not going to be allowed to do the same. Consider having something in your handbooks or in your policy about bribery, about theft. I don't need to go into these verbatim, but the fact that this is not something that the company tolerates, and if we see you or catch you stealing any type of product, money, etc., we don't have any tolerance. Same with bribery. Anti-discrimination, to me, this really also goes to the heart of how we treat people. And when you talk about maintaining a good ethical company, this goes to part of the fundamental core principles, right? How are we not only treating those on the outside, but how are we treating others within our own company? And so making sure your workplace has a good anti-discrimination policy and anti-harassment policy is very important. I put in here too, make sure you look at your policies and your reporting mechanisms. Oftentimes companies make the mistake of only having one layer of reporting. So for example, if you, Rebecca, have an issue at the workplace, you have to report it to HR. Well, what if HR is the one that is treating me poorly? Or then what? So make sure when you're looking at your policies that there's two levels of reporting. You can report it to HR or the president, or you can report it to the supervisor or HR. So something to keep in mind. And once more, no retaliation. We cannot turn blind eyes, and we cannot discourage people from reporting harassment or discrimination. Otherwise, it's just going to create an issue where employees are going to be fearful to report any violations. So then finally, how do we go about enforcement? So we want to be very diligent about our enforcement actions. We want to figure out who within our companies is going to be responsible for enforcement. You may want to talk about adopting a compliance officer. Number two, I've talked about this, which is we can't tolerate these behaviors. We can't let things slip. We need to hold people accountable. We've talked about no retaliation. Another important point is start the hiring process. First impressions are key. And if you are talking with your new hires or your potential candidates about what you as an organization values, that's going to be one of their first impressions, and that's going to stick with them. Make sure you have clear expectations of what's okay, what's not okay. Annual training, policy review, key. You may have an employee that's there 5 years, they're going to forget about that policy. Make sure you think about annual training. Give employees the tools to be successful, and of course, praise positive behavior. So I know I went through that quickly. I want to be very respectful of your time. And so I am going to go ahead. I don't know if you have any questions or not. I'm going to stop sharing here.
Yes, actually, Rebecca, we do. And that's a great time before we move on to Doug to handle a question that is pertinent to what you were saying. The question we got is, what about business entertainment? You can hardly take anyone to a sporting event or something like that for under $100.
Oh, you're right. No, I agree with you on that one. I mean, obviously, if you're in the business where you have to entertain clients, I'm not saying that you can't do that, but let's put in parameters, and so that they know what is okay and what is not okay. So I mean, we client entertain. So, but if you have things like vendors, where I see issues coming in oftentimes is I have a manager, and the manager talks to vendor A, and the vendor says, hey, if you let me do this price for the company, I'll give you some tickets to the Browns game next week. Those are the situations that we're trying to prevent. Client entertainment's fine as long as the business itself sets out what the parameters are for that entertainment.
Just to preview, it's a client entertainment or public official entertainment is a really slippery slope. And I'll talk about that during my presentation, but certainly in a business world, a degree of client entertainment is accepted. It's part of the norm. It's that idea of, are we building a relationship or are we doing a quid pro quo? Okay, building relationships are entirely appropriate. Accepting any sort of gift in return for something that either benefits the company specifically or you in your role as an employee crosses the line pretty quick. So in any business relationship, it's important to have those relationships. And, for a lot of us, the people we do the most work in as a outside lawyer, the people we do work for and the people we do work with are a lot of times people who don't just select us because we're the smartest employment law lawyer in the world or the best environmental lawyer in the world, although that would not apply to either Rebecca or I. But they hire us because they enjoy working with us and they enjoy the relationships that we have. So building relationships is part of doing business. But the example that Rebecca gave, where if you can give me if you can see your way clear to give me this 5% discount on this order, I'm sure we could figure out a way to swing some tickets to the Masters. I mean, those are the sorts of things that that undermine business and really undermine the relationship as well over time. So it's that quid pro quo part of the entertainment that you want to be careful of.
Okay, I think if we don't have any other questions, Doug,
Yep.
you.
Yeah, thanks. There are no other questions on that first section, so.
Okay, well, again, I want to thank you all for being here. I'm going to try and share my screen. So we'll take
We'll
see how this works. Okay.
There you go.
It seems to be working. Is it working for everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm going to talk to you about the Ohio ethics law, and there's a slide down here that applies specifically to your interaction with public officials. You'll note on the title page here that I give some credit to Mark Wagner. Mark is partner of Rebecca and mine, and Mark does an annual training session on the Ohio ethics law. I have admittedly plagiarized a couple of his slides for this presentation, but I guess it isn't plagiarism if you give credit to the person who did the work. So particularly in an ethics presentation, I thought it important to give some credit to Mark for his work. Let me start by saying that, I talked a little bit about building relationships. It's important, and we all recognize it's important to build relationships, not just with other people we do business with, but it's frequently important to build relationships with regulators and politicians who have a role in regulating our business. And my goal today is to give you some background on how not to turn a trip to the State House or courthouse into a trip to a big house. And that one is entirely Mark's. So again, my purpose is to provide an overview of the Ohio ethics law and explain the components of the law, focusing on conflicts of interest, public contracts, and a little bit, very briefly, on post-employment situations. I also, at the end, want to talk about campaign finance laws a little bit, and about contributions and the differences between political contributions and bribes. So that should be fun. So I'll start with this. What are ethics? They are the moral principles that govern a person's or group's behavior, and corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. There's some other discussion down there, but it's important in light of some recent headlines, to note that public corruption includes corruption of the political process and of government agencies, as well as corruption in the process for allocating monies, public funds for contracts, grants, and hiring. We're going to avoid that. Okay. Again, the Ohio ethics law is designed to ensure that public employees are not influenced by personal interests when spending public dollars or making public decisions. That is a lofty goal, and it's implemented in a variety of ways, and I'm going to try and highlight a few of those. The ethics law that I'm going to talk about mostly today applies to all state and local public officials and employees. Now, there are ethics laws that apply to legislative and judicial public office holders as well. And I'm talking about state legislative and judicial members, which are slightly different than what we're going to hear here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time about lobbying, but you're going to see me, we're going to talk about gifts and about prohibition of gifts. But state legislative parties are expected to be lobbied. They have disclosure requirements. We'll talk about those a little bit, but not quite as broad a prohibition. But the ethics laws also apply to private parties and corporations who do business with public offices. So while recently what we've seen in the news are FBI indictments of largely public office holders, it's also the people who are giving the illegal gifts or making the illegal bribes. They're also guilty of separate crimes. So we want to avoid that as well. The Ohio Ethics Commission promotes ethics in public service to really for a public confidence purpose. I don't know how, I hear when these recent indictments came down, one of my partners said to me, well, everybody assumes that's what goes on. And as a 17-year office holder who, that really bothers me, that people assume that's just the way business is done. It is not the way business is done. It is the exception, not the rule. And the Ohio Ethics Commission is there to promote that. They also oversee the General Assembly and lobbying activity and financial disclosures. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about those today, but interestingly, they do provide counseling to avoid ethical problems, and they conduct educational activities and those sorts of things as well. Just the basics of the Ohio ethics law is that there are a number of things that are defined as specifically not permitted, and they contain criminal restrictions. For example, they restrict participation in public matters involving direct and defined personal or benefits for personal, family, and business interests. It limits compensation for public duties to their public employer. You can't be paid twice for doing I can't be paid by a private entity for serving as a city councilman, or your building inspector can't be paid by the contractor who's building your building in addition to being paid by the public entity. The laws restrict personal, family, and business interests in public contracts. We'll talk about that. They address nepotism and and it also controls disclosure of confidential information. If in your role as a public official, you have access to confidential information, it provides you cannot disclose those. Okay. The ethics law also has a general public protection in the form of financial disclosure. And in this regard, about 12,000 public officials, employees, and candidates are required to complete financial disclosure statements annually. And that's to allow the public to understand the sources of a public official's income and finances, and to allow the public to assess conflicts of interest. They also require disclosures of, like I said, sources of income and gift, and companies in which filers have investments and sources of travel or meals. I can tell you, having completed these for almost 2 decades, that the disclosure is pretty extensive. It's a public record, And when you start listing all the diversified holdings in your 401k, it can be a daunting task. In general, public officials don't disclose the amount of any of their investments, but they do disclose what they're invested in. Okay. The general rule here is whenever the interest of a specific public official or the public official's family or business associates, there's an issue of business ethics. So, and we'll get in, and it starts with conflict of interest. And that means that a public employee who takes an action or is involved in making a decision that directly affects themselves or their family members or business associates is prohibited. So, for example, if Sylvania City Council is considering retaining outside legal counsel and is going to Shumaker wants to be considered for that, I'm required to recuse myself and not participate in any way in that consideration. And that would include even me suggesting to someone that we ought to consider Shumaker. That's a clear conflict of interest, since I've been a partner here for, a long time. Anyway. So again, it also extends to family members. So I have a son who sells power gates, and he recently sold one to the county. If he were selling one to the city of Sylvania, I couldn't participate in any of the legislation leading up to that approval. Gifts. Now, with regard to public employees, there is an outright ban of public employees from soliciting or accepting or using their public position to secure things of value that could have substantial and improper influence on the employee. So it's an absolute ban if the gift could have a substantial and improper influence on the employee. So in determining what's a substantial and improper influence, you have to look at the entirety of the circumstances. What is a substantial value? Well, that's not established in any particular instance. Rebecca's example before of $100 might be a good guideline, but it's not the law. So it kind of comes down to, is a ticket to a mud hen game substantial? Is a ticket to a World Series substantial? Clearly a trip to the Masters is substantial, but the other part of that is, who is the source? If your brother-in-law wants to take you to a World Series game and doesn't have any dealings with the city or with your job or with whatever you're doing, that's fine. But when the developer who regularly appears in front of the zoning officer decides that the zoning officer would like to go to the World Series, that's probably a problem. One of the things that I run into all the time is people want to play golf with me, and I've just gotten into the habit of, I don't play golf with anybody that ever has anything to do with the city of Sylvania unless I pay my own greens fee. And it just eliminates the issue. And actually, for most of those of us in public service, that is pretty much the standard. We just don't do gifts because we don't do lunches, or when we do lunches, we pick up the bill. Mike Bonfiglio, who's the judge in Sylvania Municipal Court, as a city official, we fund that court, and I have a great relationship with Mike. We have breakfast periodically, but we have a firm rule that we alternate picking up the tab, and we observe it because we just don't want to go there. Almost anything is a thing of value, and that's why I just don't do them. Appearance of impropriety, and the reason I don't do those things is I don't want to have this appearance of impropriety. I don't want to be in a debate with anyone over whether my gift, the gift that I took, was substantial and was going to influence me. So, buying drinks is one of the things that seems, it's very simple, very easy, but I just don't. I choose not to go there. It's not necessarily a uniform rule, but I think it's one that makes sense. Public contracts, and this is a hard and fast rule. This simply is that public employees can't profit from contracts that he or she authorizes on behalf of a public agency. You can't use your you can't use your authority to secure a contract for your family member or your business associate. And there's no gray area on this. This is a black and white deal. If you're doing your job and suddenly you realize that a family member's there, you need to get out of it immediately. And on the other hand, and I've jumped ahead here, but on the other hand, if you are dealing with a public body and you have a relative who's involved in that public body and you end up with a contract, you should know that that contract is void as fraudulent. And so you don't have a contract. So if you get in that situation, you want to be aware of that and steer clear of it. Nepotism seems obvious. Hiring is considered a public contract, and you can't hire family members or be involved in that. The revolving door prohibitions are relatively new in Ohio. They were not there 25 years ago. But the idea is that during the time that you're in public service and for a year afterward, you can't represent anyone on any matter in which you personally participated while a public employee. This prevents me from one day reviewing who's going to get garbage contract, and the next day representing the garbage contractor in front of my buddy who I've worked with for 30 years. Again, I've seen in practice, it can get grayer, but the prohibition is very black and white. I want to talk a little bit about campaign finance law, just so you all have some understanding of what what both candidates and have to do, and how that will impact you. Ohio law requires public office holders to report contributions to their campaign accounts and on expenditures from their campaign accounts. And these reports are generally due to be filed 30 days before an election and then after an election. And there are a couple things about this that, about campaign contributions that are relevant. First, and it amazes me how often this surprises people, but campaign contributions cannot be anonymous. You can't make anonymous contributions to a political campaign. Political campaign, if they receive an anonymous contribution, they're required to investigate who might have made the contribution. The other thing that is that's important here is that campaign contributions are limited to one-time $100 cash contributions. So the only cash, if you want to make a cash contribution to a campaign, you are limited to a one-time $100 limit, and you still have to be disclosed as the contributor. And so that there can be confusion about that. It doesn't mean that you can go to multiple fundraisers over a period of time and every time give them $100 of cash. But it means one time, $100 cash. The final thing that I want to point out is that generally corporate contributions to individual campaigns are not permitted. Now, there are, through political action committees, corporations can create political action committees, and through their political action committees, which are generally funded by employees, they can make contributions. But in general, just Doug Haynam running for public office, he can't accept a corporate check. So one of the hot issues of today is what is a campaign contribution and what is a bribe? And there clearly is a distinction between them. A campaign contribution is made to benefit a candidate without a specific expectation that the individual receiving the contribution will take a specific public action for the unique benefit of the donor. I read that because I wrote it carefully. It's one of the things that and I don't want to pre-litigate anything, but that's clearly an issue in campaigns. When you support someone because of their position on, for example, you support someone because you believe they're knowledgeable and informed and will be fair-minded about zoning decisions and about land use decisions. That's fine. When a contribution to a candidate is made with the expectation that your candidate will support a specific change in zoning for a specific parcel that you're developing, that's a bribe. A campaign contribution becomes a bribe when it's made with the expectation that the donor will receive a specific personal benefit from an action the politician will take or has taken in office. Now, in both instances, you have the politician getting money from a third party. And the distinction between a campaign contribution and a bribe is dependent on all the circumstances surrounding the contribution. I mean, I admit that. But I will say this, that when an individual labels something to be a campaign contribution that then is not reported in the campaign finance disclosure statements, that's a significant indicator that the payment was more in the nature of a bribe than a true campaign contribution. And I think we will be hearing more about that in the days and weeks to come. I want to wrap up with my presentation with just a note that it's important that you understand what the limits are relating to ethics and what they are for public officials. Only if you're aware, because things that, you know, we talked about the difference between dealing with developing a business relationship and developing a relationship with a public official. It's a lot, it's a night and day difference. And while certainly your political and governmental relations are important, you can't approach them the same way you approach your development of relationships with contractors and other people you do business with. And it's important for you and your business to promote and defend moral behavior and to prevent corruption. It takes two to tango here. I mean, it takes a politician, but it also takes often a business entity to create to protect a climate of ethical behavior. When it comes to dealing with public officials, if you have any question about whether any dealings with that public official are ethical, you can contact the Ethics Commission. I put the number on the email address on the website address on the slide there, and you can ask anonymous, unspecific questions and get answers. I mean, that's part of their outreach. So that is something that is available to you. All right.
Thank you. We did get a few questions, and I will go ahead and share those so that we can get those answered. One of them went back to the hiring of family members, and the question was, is that immediate family, or I'm guessing is that also then does that extend beyond that?
Well, it clearly applies to immediate family. You know, it's and I haven't researched this question, so I'm not sure I know the answer, but I'm sure it would extend to my grandchildren. I'm sure it would extend to the in-law, well, my son and daughters-in-law. You know, I'm also pretty confident it doesn't apply to second cousins. But you know, before I did any of that, that's a question I would direct to the Ethics Commission and say, hey, my son-in-law's sister's husband now is coming to, you know, wants to do some work for the city of Sylvania. Is this something I can participate in or not? And until I had a favorable response from the Ethics Commission on something like that, I would recuse myself from being involved in it. But yeah, it doesn't go on forever. And you know, and I know we have, you know, I know people have big families, and the people that they consider to be families at a Christmas gathering or a wedding probably is broader than the definition of families under the Ohio ethics law. So that wasn't probably the perfect answer, but the best answer is call and check it out.
The next question that we have is, in regard to campaign or funds. So an elected official gets campaign money from a company, and that elected official benefits from the campaign funds. It pays for campaigning. Then you see that business getting picked for a lot of bids. How is that different, is the way the question is asked.
Okay, well, first thing is an elected official, if the company is a corporation, they can't take that contribution in the first place. On the other hand, but let's say it doesn't come from a corporate entity. Let's say it comes from, and this happens all the time. It happens a lot where and let's just use a contractor or a developer, for example, who in his individual capacity makes a contribution to a political campaign. Again, it comes down to this totality of the circumstances. If the contribution is directly linked with the understanding and the expectation that I'm going to make a contribution, and so then I'm going to go and approve your development, that is more than problematical. I think it's either very close to a bribe or is a bribe, would be considered a bribe and would be prohibited. But the other thing that happens, honestly, is that the people who make political contributions often are people who want to develop relationships with the people who are regulating them. So if the individual is inclined to make a political contribution, it really does need to be made without ties and without those expectations. And then the test is in how the elected official conducts themselves. You know, there are circumstances where political officials, you know, they may have, everybody, a lot of politicians have, if you will, political leanings, or they have policy views. And when someone acts outside of their policy inclinations that specifically benefits someone who's making, you know, significant political contributions, that raises that question. You know, I mean, it just raises the question. Doesn't mean that it's a bribe. It's not proof that it's a bribe. But you know, there's, you know, I'm going to be the last one in the world to tell you that politicians don't look at who makes contributions to their campaign and try to have a sympathetic ear when those folks appear with issues before them. But at the end of the day, you know, you understand that your primary obligation is to your public service and not to any individual. I don't know if that's an adequate answer to that question.
But I mean, ultimately, Doug, doesn't it just come to, I mean, what I'm hearing you say is, I mean, each situation's unique, and ultimately it comes down to intent in some respects, right?
Absolutely.
When you receive that political donation, are you doing it, or when that person's giving it, are they giving it to you to sway your vote? And so it comes down to a fact-specific determination. And sometimes, you know.
And I'll also, you know, and I'll also say that smart political bodies build in processes and procedures that limit the ability to do this. For example, most public contracts are let as a result of a bid process. So people bid on the, if you're going to build a road or build a sewer, you prepare your plans, you put them out to bid, the bids come in, and generally there has to be good reason not to accept the low bid. So the fact that construction company A made political contributions to everybody on council doesn't help much if construction company B comes in with a low bid for the project. And I mean, I've experienced that where people that I have relationships with have bid on work in Sylvania, and we select the low bidder for that reason. You know, and in fact, anytime that we don't accept the low bidder, we go to extra lengths to document what the performance reasons were for doing something else, and that's just good practice. You clearly want to avoid that appearance that because a particular contractor is particularly involved politically, that he has some sort of advantage over others who may or may not be.
Thank you. We did have one question that came on early on, and that was, can these slides be made available to our attendees? So we are happy to share those on our member resource page for the chamber. If that works for both of you, you can send them my way and we can make those available.
Absolutely, we'll get those to you, Julie.
Fantastic. So I know Brian was having some challenges with his microphone a little bit earlier, so we're going to see if that's working for him. He does have one thing that he's going to conclude with us for today.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca and Doug. Great information. I think a great example of the timely information that we try as a chamber to get out to our members to help you do the things that you need to do to be successful. So we appreciate all of that, and we can only do that through your support, and it is appreciated and noticed. One thing I did want to just add on, Doug's slide could not be any better, his last one. If you're not sure, the rest of them were great too, Doug, but especially that last one.
Brian, I understand.
If you're not sure, it's always better to ask. The Ethics Commission, you can reach out to the Board of Elections on campaign finance questions. You're always better off. And I don't think I've ever seen anybody get in trouble for asking a question to avoid later on. So feel free to ask. And while we can't give you the advice, if you need help connecting with somebody, you can always reach out to us at the chamber and we can direct you in the right direction. So to build a little bit on it, I know Doug mentioned that Mark does an annual ethics presentation, and we've been fortunate enough the last few years that Mark has been part of our Institute for Leadership and Advocacy, and that's really an opportunity for any of you that are interested in taking a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the issues and the requirements, expectations of being in public office or working with public officials to get involved. And that is a program that will get started in January. We'll have some more information about the sessions coming out probably another month or so. But it is the longest running program like it in Ohio. It's a 10-week structured program, and then we'll extend that throughout the year with some additional offerings. And you can see Tim's contact information on your screen, or you can go to toledochamber.com ILA to get some more information about that. So thank you very much again. Julie, I don't know if we had any other questions, but if not, thank you again for everybody who came out and participated, and hope we found this beneficial, and we look forward to seeing you at future events with the Chamber.
Thank you.